Welcome to the Estates Made Simple podcast with Jenna Carvalho and Gordon VanderLeek. We are on a mission to simplify the world of estate administration, helping executors gain the knowledge required to manage an estate. Please note, the following is for informational purposes only and is not to be considered legal, tax, or financial advice. We recommend you seek individualized advice for your unique situation with qualified professionals.
Welcome to another episode of Estates Made Simple. This is a bit of a special one, and we're glad you're here to listen. We'll talk about that in a moment. My name's Gordon VanderLeek, founder and managing lawyer of VanderLeek Law, and my wonderful co-host for the last 50 episodes, Jenna Carvalho. Welcome to another episode, Jenna. Look forward to getting a little nostalgic today.
Happy 50th, Gord.
There you go. As I've alluded to, or maybe the cat's out of the bag now, is that this is the recording. This is the episode that is going to mark our 50th episode for this small little podcast. I know when you think of famous podcasters, they're on episode whatever 750, or they've got some humongous number that they've been doing for a long time. So humble beginnings. But we thought it would be interesting to just think back over the last 50 episodes and begin to reflect on what are highlights for us and observations. And I guess my first observation would be a huge thank you. I think when we started this, in the back of my mind, I'm going, I'm all excited about it. It was so ecstatic that Jenna, you agreed to this little venture. And as we were doing the planning and getting things set up and microphones hooked up and all this, get the tech worked out and figuring out what we're going to be doing here, all of this would not be possible were it not for the listeners. So we obviously, our plan and our hope is to continue to do this and to provide meaningful content for you. But of course, getting where we are today, as we look at some of the stats, a whole bunch of you are listening to this, and we just wanted to start our time of reflection by saying thank you. Because that's what makes this meaningful, is that we know there are people who are gaining information from this, and we're reaching out and hopefully providing that guidance. Jenna, for you, just looking back over the last little bit, is there, maybe share a highlight do you have from the last 50 times we've turned the record button on?
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's been 50 times. We've spent a lot of hours together, Gord. It's almost like we're besties now.
Indeed.
I will say, looking back from a personal standpoint, I remember one of our first recordings, I had my newborn son hanging out on the ground next to me playing, and you can hear him cooing in the background. So I think that's
right.
A pretty neat thing to think about, and know that he's now almost 2 years old, walking and running around. So just the time that we've put into this and the time that's passed has been great and enjoyable. And then from more of the podcast perspective and the information that we're sharing, I realized too, one of the realizations is that this podcast isn't something that our listeners listen to for entertainment purposes. They're not popping open a bottle of wine on a Friday night and saying, oh, I can't wait to learn about more estate administration. But they are listening to it in times of need. So when they're experiencing an estate administration, or they know of someone who's going through this, or they're planning their own estate. So I think the purpose of this was originally to provide executors advice and guidance, but I think it's also highlighting the need for people to plan with their own estates. And so we hope that this has encouraged people to think about their own planning, what happens when they pass away, who their executor is going to be. I know for myself, it's definitely encouraged me to think about and talk about with my own husband what happens with our kids if we pass away, who's best to take care of them. So it's intertwined in a lot of different ways in family and business. And that's why I just love talking about it, because it's so relevant to so many people.
Yeah. Jen, as I think about highlights, thank you for sharing that. A lot of that echoes with me, right? When you look at situations where you're talking about what happens in an estate, there's always lessons from a planning perspective, maybe to avoid those scenarios or to plan around them. So maybe some of those more negative things don't happen, or you ensure the positive stuff happens, right? Having conversations, connecting with your executor to make them more aware of what's involved, all those sorts of things. For me, looking back at the last 50 episodes, my mind goes to those episodes where we had some guests, and we had a number of them, I think, that were very insightful. Maybe because they're a little different than the norm of the typical episode, is that they do stand out. But certainly talking to Michael Pearson from Pearson's Funeral Home, I remember that one in particular becoming more aware. I knew it, but as a lawyer, oftentimes we get involved in an estate once the family has gone through the funeral arrangements, just understanding sort of the process they go through, and quite frankly, the amount of time that the family has to take to that. I've heard those stories before, but it really resonated as I'm thinking back, going, yeah, that was a real teaching point for me to bring home, with less about the legal mechanics of an estate, but really just that emotion and everything a family has to do, and the really valuable role that a funeral home director can play in helping the family through that, and the compassion they show that in a very difficult time for the family. I just opened some insights on that. Michael Kine from Estately was another example of somebody who talked about what about those personal effects, and how do we deal with all that stuff, and what are the options involved, the tremendous amount of work involved with all that, and an opportunity to bring in a professional, like bring in people to help with regard to that, was an increased insight to be able to say, yeah, you don't have to do that alone. You can bring in those professionals. You can delegate that authority to people who get good at this. And while there's a fee attached to it, it's going to really assist in the administration of the estate, and it's done professionally. Also, with the opportunity to say, if you're managing an estate and you're reporting to beneficiaries, you can say it is done professionally, right?
Yeah.
And Mike and I have had an opportunity to actually work together on an estate. I know you've dealt with them in your former life before, and I think really both had the takeaway there is to say, if you find the right people, it can really add to I guess the whole process, and the sense you have of, hey, I'm able to get help for this. My responsibility is not entirely on my shoulders. I can bring in help, and that makes the job seem a little bit lighter. So I think those are some understanding at those moments, especially both of those, interestingly, as I reflect on this, are for estates at the very early stages, which is also what I've experienced, and I think is a fair statement to say there's a lot of work at the front end. So knowing that there's people in place who can help with that would be really good. And the more and the takeaways, for example, would be do more of the pre-planning with the funeral home. Those are options that exist, and they walk families through that just to gain the knowledge of that, so you can do some planning, would be a takeaway. And also it made me maybe say, oh, I got to declutter my house. I've got too much stuff.
Yeah.
If we're looking at all the personal belongings, and I got to make that simpler, going, if my executor has to do all this work, that's a lot of work. I should simplify that, and simplify those personal items, or give stuff away that I don't need anymore. That the more work you do on that, the better it is for the executor. How about you? If you look at is there a specific episode that comes to mind that is a highlight for you?
Yes, actually, one of our very first episodes talking about probate and when it was needed. And in fact, one of the episodes that had the most viewers and listeners. And it just highlights the fact that probate is a household word. People know about it and have heard it when passing, but perhaps not everyone understands it and when it is needed. And just highlighting the importance of learning about it, because most estates over a certain value have to go through that process. So I really liked it. If you're listening to this episode, I encourage you to go listen to it, because it's good information in that one.
Yeah. And it's interesting that if we have the 50 episodes, I know there are circumstances under which we can now share that with people. So I want to emphasize a point you made earlier about, it's fun to say we've done 50 recordings and maybe amassed a little mini library of things that may be useful. So certainly want to encourage people to check out prior episodes. And if you have a question about a new episode, just reach out to us and we'd be happy to tackle that. And maybe that's useful for other people as well. As we bring it to a close for this episode, as we reflect back, it's also, I think, appropriate to thank our person behind the scenes, Lindy Rock of Rock Solid Administration, who creates all the magic of making us sound better than we deserve to sound behind the scenes and getting episodes published and having that on social media so the word can get out, helping us do some analysis of trends and coming up with great ideas on how we can make improvements. I know we had a recent planning session where we were looking forward to the new year and how we can do things better. So it's exciting to say, hey, we've accomplished 50, but we hope we can even improve on it as it goes along. And if you have suggestions, again, for topics or other input, we're happy to help with that. So in closing, do feel free to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can subscribe wherever you gather your podcast material in your app of choice. And also, we do have this recording of the video version of this conversation available on our YouTube channel. So check out Estates Made Simple, and you can follow along that way as well. So with those as closing comments and looking forward to the next 50 and another milestone at episode 100, we'll look forward to that celebration and enjoy always our conversations and your insights that we can do this together. I think it's a better episode, Jenna, that we do it, and you agreed at the front end to say, yeah, let's do this together. So hopefully that the combination of our insights and different perspectives makes this a podcast that's enjoyable to consume and to come back to, and we encourage you to do that. So with that, thank you to our listeners. Thank you to our support team, Lindy in particular, and thank you, Jenna, for your insights and all the work you do to keep us organized and the conversations that we've had. It's been a good 50 episodes.
Yes, it sure has. Thanks, Gord. Look forward to the next 50.